everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we're going to discuss about the human face of climate change. This is the side talk of COP27. We have our world famous speaker, Dr. Asim Musa, Mr. Ron, Professor David Smith, Professor Ching, and Professor Donald. First, I would like to give chance Dr. Asim Musa from Egypt.
Greetings.
Hello, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be with you again today. Yesterday, I was talking about the cloud of everything technology and the budget and the economy, to fight climate change. Today, I'm going to talk about also about the COP27 that will help in Sharm el-Sheikh. And also talking about the human mobility application of the climate crisis, because there will be, 216 million people could become internal climate migrant by 2050 because of this, climate change. So urgent need, to respect, human rights, because, we need human rights that, for for education, for for clean water, for new technology like cloud of everything, for for a good climate, no crisis regarding that. So human capital, it's essential for meeting the objective for this climate change, without focus in to invest in people, and to care about people, to train people, to to spend money about people regarding this climate. So it will it's no good for this climate change. Also, will accelerate the global poverty, inequality in all the world. So, for example, by 2030, climate change is expected to push and 132 million, to poverty because of this climate change, and also because of we tried the required national commitment to limit the warming globally to 1.5 degree. So COP27 is essential, to start to implement the required procedure, as what's happened in 2015, in Paris Agreement. So also let us, remember that COVID-19 pandemic pushed about 150 billion people, into poverty by 2030, plus, 132 million poverty because of climate change. So we have, to take care about this, the procedure to take care about before this climate change. Also, as we talk about also the war between Russia and Ukraine, and there's also affect all the world regarding to the economy. Also, if there's a touch between China or USA or something like that, or Taiwan, that will also, we have like to avoid all this war, because if we don't have peace, we cannot do anything. So peace is so important. So today, we are talking about gender equality, because women makes more effective for as a climate leader. So we have also to to fight racism, fight the difference, and in color, and in religion, in origin, in country. We have to to look for the human rights. Also, we have to take care about goal number 5 to have like 17 SDG goals and 169 169 uh, target to make it for the United Nations in 2030. So we have to take care about goal number 5, gender equality, and also all the 17 SDG. So also for women and the children, because women and the children affects more in case of what's happened. So we have we take a procedure for that. For example, we have climate finance. It's like 3 way COP delegate can ensure that they are addressing climate justice to make justice in climate. For example, climate, finance, adequate representation, and also like people-centering investment. And also, I would like to talk about because some, for example, Africa or Arab country, affected by climate change, and they are not, the only reason for this, climate change, because big countries like USA or China may be responsible more for this climate change and supposed to help it. The developed country must help developing country, by a budget, by the knowledge. For example, the technology of the 21st century, must give him a know-how to use this technology. So we have to make sure that there's no gap between Africa and the other country. So I think in COP 27 do a lot of good activity, or also looking for more implementation, not only words but for implementing all needs for this climate change, and for care about human investment. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Dr. Asim Mosa. Now I request Professor Ron. Mr. Ron, Mr. Ron?
Uh, can you give me a couple of minutes? I've got to get something
Yes.
adjusted here, and I'll come right back.
Okay, thank you. Professor David Smith. Yeah.
Sharif, thank you for letting me be on the show today. Again, very essential topic as we see what's happening in COP27. And if you look at this particular COP, it's going to be about money and people. And human capital is really essential for meeting the objectives of addressing climate change and fostering development. And without really focused investment in people and in technology, climate change will accelerate global poverty. It will just make the inequities grow larger and larger. And it will continue itself, or climate change, unabated. If we look and produce a group of human capital around the world that we are using, and look at the human face of it, we can alleviate some of the worst impacts of climate change on people, and also empower people to drive to this green transition point that we're trying to work through. And you begin to see at the differences. At the opening of COP27, there was an open letter published calling for human rights and diversity of nations and nation sites, particularly the developing nations, to be taken into account at the heart of the climate changing. And you see the impacts. For example, in Pakistan, the recent flooding affected more than 30 million people. And we see more and more of those happening as climate change is going on. And if you go back to the Paris Agreement that we talked a little bit about yesterday, the Paris Agreement makes the need for rights-based climate change very clear, calling on all the states to respect, promote, and consider their human rights obligations as they look forward. You see it working even further across that, because the global population is such that a lot of the impact disproportionately hits developing nations more than developed nations, as you look at, but yet their ability to respond with money and support is much, much lower. And that is one of the outputs I believe we're going to see out of the COP27, is increased emphasis in how do we fund more into developing nations? How do we make this a level playing field? Because we know for us to be successful, all nations have to be involved. And particularly if you look in Africa, where COP27 is being held, the disparities there are really pretty great as we see the different elements put in place. And it's one where we see the percentages just really skewed. So, for example, if you look at a recent report from the Global Carbon Project team, looking at Africa. Africa accounts for about 16% of the world's population, and it's only responsible for 3.2% of the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere over the last 45 years. And you see that, but it needs to be included in the solution. It's there, even though it is 16% of the world's population, which is pretty high for a landmass. It's only 3.2% of the carbon, but yet we have to bring them into it. We have to have them be part of it. And I believe when you look at the human face of climate change in COP27, you're going to see increased emphasis on how do we fund more equity across all of the nations of the world, particularly going into the developing nations. So, Sharif, I think that's a good start for me.
Thank you. Professor Ron?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Now
Yes.
this time, I had bright morning sunshine coming in, and it was interfering with the presentation. So thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to become acquainted with you people, and thank you for setting us up, Sharif. And Don, I met Sharif through Don just recently, and I'm really pleased to become acquainted here. So I just recently read a report by a young fellow who raised the challenge as to whether the IPCC was qualified to remain our voice of understanding the climate change phenomenon, as if to say that they've had their chance and they blew it. They have been consistently off the mark substantially in their understanding of how serious this matter is, and it seems that their ability to characterize the science is very much in doubt. Therefore, one must examine the record and identify, if possible, a more reliable source of information. And if we had a source of information that truly called this what what it is, we might collectively have a better chance at coping with the challenge that we face. And um, generally, what people say is, "Well, it's a lot worse than we thought it was going to be, or it's coming sooner than we expected." Well, who's we, and why weren't you paying attention to the signs that were already there? That you know we have not interpreted correctly. Now, I hear mention of Africa. The thing about Africa is that everybody is projecting the World Bank and all the economic indicators, as well as the demographic community, is saying that the population of Africa is going to grow, but I don't see that supported by the physics of the matter, such that we are already seeing in Africa, amongst other places, of course, a terrible disaster, and I think that the climate impact is going to be horrific on these population centers. So therefore, I come back to my understanding that we're way off the mark, not only in terms of meteorology, and I mean, what's happening to the atmosphere, but also in understanding the limitations of fossil fuels, such that I live in a first world country where, after 1973, since that time of the original oil crisis, there's never been another oil crisis like that. But if you go around the world, you'll see many places over many decades where there have been long lines, people waiting to get fuel in their vehicles. And then you talk to a person living in Pakistan. I just heard on the radio last night an interview with a woman. The only time she was ever in a car was on her wedding day. She was in a car just long enough to go from one place to another when she was getting married. And so I think that the offering by the first world is pathetically underwhelming. And for example, only 2 weeks ago, the organization that was being looked upon as a guiding light in finance, which was the Glasgow Alliance, Bankers Alliance for Net Zero, they decided that it was no longer necessary to put enforced standards upon these banks because they still wanted to lend money to fossil fuels. And I think that it's completely irresponsible for these banks to be left to their own devices and say, well, we'll volunteer when we're good and ready for this. There's just not adequate sense of urgency from amongst the first world players in all of this. And there is opportunity to realize economic gain, if you will, from solving these problems, but it has to be a radical shift. And so if you come back to the question of the human face of climate change, I just think that our leadership is woefully uninformed about what's really happening with the climate, and I think they would operate differently if it was made clear just how serious this problem is. With, for example, the Thwaites Glacier hanging on by, just barely hanging on by its fingertips and likely to burst loose at any time and cause destructions of beaches all around the world, and a foot or two of sea level rise is going to be a massive wake up call, I think, if it comes to that. Oh, and I might just say one more thing. Getting to net zero is insufficient. We have to get carbon out of the atmosphere, and the methods that are being approached right now are again woefully inadequate. There are many new ideas coming along that have greater potential, and I think that it's urgent that these methods for reducing the carbon already in the atmosphere and in the oceans is going to be very critical as well. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Ron. Mr. Ching.
Yeah, well, usually I reserve Thursday, Friday, Saturday for my epigenetic lifestyle. So it's not a good day for me to talk on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But anyway, this talk, I will make this talk very important because this is an important, time. What I see is this: timing is important, and the timing might be right for working on climate change. Okay, let me give you my very pragmatic reason. Okay, we should force our group, should focus on our effort on England, which has committed more funding than any other nation this time, $1.5 billion. Okay, its prime minister is attending the conference, so the sister's in charge. His sister's in charge. So what we should approach England with knowledge, in particular the infinite spreadsheet. Okay, England needs infinite spreadsheet regardless, the climate or anything. Its economy needs an infinite spreadsheet. We should approach England with knowledge particularly the infinite spreadsheet, and we should also approach the legacy of Milton Friedman. You see, the combination is perfect. Okay, the England has a conservative party leading the country. Okay, the Milton Friedman is the leader of the conservative movement. So sheriff should try to get in touch with England, and I will be talking to Patrick Freeman, the grandson of Milton Freeman, this month and the next month. So let's combine this into actual our group, something that will work by our group. Even if there's no climate change, I would be considered of approaching England, our own group. But the sheriff should be in a perfect position because he's from Bangladesh, from the Hindu India, what opportunity can you have, during your lifetime? Okay. You see, this is a continuation of my career. You see, let me give you very quickly my career because my talk is so short. You see, in my 40s, around 1980s, I was the leader of all Chinese student and scholars, and also the leader of all the real estate appraisal and the top commercial real estate brokers. You see, I was the leader of two very big important groups. It looks like I was destined to become the leader of the world, leading all the Chinese and leading all the top professional real estate professional. But all this, my career was disrupted by the Tiananmen rebellion, student rebellion, which was sort of caused by Milton Friedman, who gave a talk upon my invitation. we sort of destroy our own situation. And also the real estate was disrupted by the defeat of our proposal, our knowledge proposal of introducing a solution value by the law FIRA of 1989, which forces all appraisers to take examination to follow the market comparison method, which was the cause of the saving loan crisis, and which made the law made the subprime vote automatically worse than the savings loan crisis because everybody followed the wrong method, the market comparison method. If you keep the price rigid with the market comparison method, you would cause a crisis. Okay, sooner or later, the invisible hand will come in and crash the market. The invisible hand today is the savior and also the curse of the free market. It causes market crash, but if it does not cause market crash, it will make things worse. Just like in the planning system where they force the price to be such and such. They interfere with the invisible hand. So basically, this is the invisible hand is in the in the mind of Milton Friedman when he think about the free market. Okay. So we want to continue this. What we are introducing is the infinite spreadsheet, which will make the invisible hand visible, and which will also calculate an equilibrium price, which will keep the range of possibilities within the range of tolerance for market crash. Another way will make market price never crash. Okay, all this when Sheriff you introduce to England, they love to see this. Okay. It comes from me, associated with Milton Friedman. Okay, and we also have a pragmatic solution to have them take a look at it. Okay, this is a perfect timing, perfect opportunity, and this climate change, it wasn't too important until this England joined the discussion. Okay, so I'm here very good because I see this timing is good. I'm here is also good timing to talk about this. And all of you, I really appreciate that you join and give the whole picture, So Don and David and Dr. Musa, we three of us, we are really yesterday we already contributed technically, and I appreciate Ron also joining us. So I'm going to restart my career on this climate change. That's great. That's good. Because this is a place where we can implement the infinite spread as a solution of of climate change. In other words, we want to take into all the factors affect climate change, not bias toward any particular direction. First, let's see what is going on with this climate. What can influence it? Both short-term and long-term. The long-term consequence to me is much, much more serious because we're going to have 40-year periodical ice age. So humans might be able to survive the ice age, but not the, we're talking about human phase, but how about animal phase? All these animals, all these insects, they all die, you see. So we need we might need to warm up the planet during the ice age. So keep the constant temperature. Okay. So all this is very interesting to me. Okay. I would like to contribute the solution to climate change. And at the same time, obviously we have financial crisis, we have military crisis, as Dr. Musa mentioned. We're going to have we have health crisis. Okay, so all this crisis, we should look all into it. But anyway, the opportunity is there, and I don't see Sharif, but anyway, I think he's going to review it. I will talk to him privately. Also, all of you, Don, David, Ron, and Dr. Musso, you can talk to him privately and see what we can contribute. And also the audience, if they know anybody in England, let's, approach them. And, they commit 1.5 billion. I hope they won't squander it again, like Ron tried to point out. Okay, let's just do it. I think this is a good opportunity. I'm in weekly communication with the Pat Freeman family. Okay, I like them to continue their legacy. Let's continue to do this. Okay, I think even today, Milton Friedman is the leading thinker of the free world, or of the world, actually. See. So basically, that's my take. And so, Don, please continue.
I guess since I'm the only one left, it's my turn. We lost our moderator here temporarily. I'm sure he'll be back. Well, I want to address a couple of things. I want to start talking about actually, I want to mention something that leverage off of something that Ron said, and then talk about something Hugh said, and then talk a little bit about the human face in the sense of the difference between the developing world and the developed world and the kinds of things that we might be able to do. First off, I think that people need to realize that we think of climate change as a very gradual process that's going to take place over a longer period of time. But as the Gulf Stream slows down, we could hit a cliff. Because if the Gulf Stream slows down too much, and it's slowing down quite a bit, then what's going to wind up happening is that the warm water that comes up from the south and basically keeps Europe and the north warm will stop. And when that happens, the northern parts of the world, Europe, won't be able to grow crops anymore. It'll get very, very cold. Even though we have global warming, one of the consequences, ironically, is that we're going to have areas that are going to, maybe sooner than we think, become extremely cold. And it'll be like overnight. I mean, it'll happen from one year to the next. It's not something that's necessarily going to be gradual. So it's that affects human beings, obviously, in profound ways, because it'll affect the food supply of the world, and of course, we all have to eat. So that's that's one of the leverage off of what Ron was saying, is that the planning that we're making is probably pretty insufficient. When we talk about the developing versus the developed world, there's kind of an opportunity. Ron and I have been working a lot with Africa and meeting with people from a variety of African countries that are, a lot of them are entrepreneurs, but we've also been meeting with government officials. And they're very aware of the issues of climate change. But they're also in a situation where people might not even have light in their house at night. And so they, of course, strive to have a quality of life that's as good as the quality of life that we have in the United States or Europe or other developed countries. But they also are very aware that that comes at a cost. And so they have been very much focused on microgrids, solar, all kinds of different kinds of energy use where they're not addicted to petroleum. And I think right now we've got a really good example of why. This goes to something that I want to talk about. Hugh mentioned something Hugh said. I'm not as fond of Milton Friedman as he is, but I think actually that rational choice economics is more of a political thing than an actual, scientific thing. But regardless, there is some wisdom to it. And one of the things about it is that we have to talk about market pricing. And the problem with petroleum is that it's not priced anywhere near what it should be, because petroleum has extreme externalities, and we're not pricing in the externalities. So externalities basically means is, what it does besides providing energy for our cars and heating our homes and things like that. It actually causes damage. So an example in economics is if you live next to a factory that creates a lot of pollution and that pollution falls on your house, then you have to spend money cleaning it up. But the company that's actually making the pollution is getting a free ride. And so that's a negative externality. And so the petroleum industry is basically getting a free ride from the negative externalities that they're causing. And in the United States, we actually subsidize the petroleum industry to an enormous extent. And so just in the Milton Friedman type of rational choice economics, if we price the petroleum in a way that was actually accounted for the negative externalities, it would be too expensive to consider, actually. I mean, right now, people in the United States are whining and bitching about how evil Joe Biden is ruining our energy because he's trying to get rid of coal. But the real reason coal is going away is because it's more expensive than everything else. It's too expensive. It's pretty useless as a fuel because solar and wind and even natural gas are all cheaper than coal. So it's just just the market is driving coal out in rational choice, as Hugh was saying. So the developed world is kind of stuck in a way, at least the United States, because the way the United States runs is it allows for minority rule. And so a minority of the people can actually stop things from happening and do things like independently of what the actual democratic will of the people is. In the United States, the majority of the people now understand that there's climate change and that it's affecting them, and they think that the central government should do something about it. But the way that the United States is set up, very powerful forces in places like Texas and North Dakota and other places, which Bakersfield, California, which all produce lots of oil, can basically, in a sense, bribe politicians. And the way that they do that is that when the election process happens, they can pour an incredible amount of money into a politician that they know is going to support their point of view. And because of that, it's really, really difficult to make change. And I know, and kind of in the background, that a message is put out constantly that if you didn't have petroleum, you wouldn't have your car. And in this recent election cycle, the Republicans, one of their main messages was that gas has gotten so expensive that you should not vote for Democrats, because Democrats are interested in alternative energy. And because of the interest in alternative energy, the reasoning went, it's causing gas prices to go up. And so therefore, what's more important to you, the ability to drive your car or fight global warming? And that worked to an incredible degree. There's a lot of people. So I'm talking about the human face of it in that particular goal, in that particular way. But on the other hand, we here in the United States are coming up with more and more technology, like Rana has developed or partially developed an incredible system of solar transportation. And that it works, actually produces energy and provides transportation for cities, for actually, you can move trash, you can move raw material, whatever, and it actually provides more energy than it uses, the transportation system. And so that's something that the developed world can help the developing world with, so that they can wind up with the type of lifestyle that we have, the ability to just go from one place to another easily without cars and without producing more energy. So the fact that the developing world isn't using that much energy is quite an opportunity, because we have the opportunity to help them develop in ways that don't use more energy. I hope that, unfortunately, there's going to be the human face of it is that there's going to be huge displacement of people as water dries up in places, and floods and sea level rise drive people out of other places. And even again in the United States, I think that it's not going to be long where a lot of Florida becomes uninhabitable. A lot of the Gulf Coast just becomes uninhabitable, and people are going to have to move and leave. And so that, of course, is happening in very dangerous in Bangladesh and other low-lying countries all over the world. And I don't know. Human beings haven't been really, really good about saying, "Oh, gosh, you poor guys, you don't have a place to live. Why don't you come and live with us?" That's not been something that human beings are really good at. And so I don't really have a solution to that, unfortunately. But I think that's what I'd like to say right now.
Thank you, Dr. Musa.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with you today. All I want to say is that, all the world, all the people in the world, we are in the same boat now. So we'd like that, we arrive safely. So we have, to cooperate with each other, not to, fight with each other. That's why, yesterday I'm talking about peace, because peace is something important. As you can see, for example, the war now between Russia and Ukraine affected, all the people in all the world. If they know, like China and USA, something touch regarding to Taiwan, if something happened, it will be, a big issue. That's why, we have first, as we said in COP27, it's established in Sharm el-Sheikh, the city of peace. That's why, we have to make, to send a message to all the world that we have to look for peace. We have to look to construct, not to destroy, to construct something, new technology for all, universal adoption of this new technology to fight, climate change, like 5G, artificial intelligence, digital twins, cloud computing, big data. And we would like, to adopt the know-how, for African and Arab country to reduce the gap between African and the Arab country and Europe and uh, and USA. That's something important. We need to hand over because we have only one place to live, the earth. So we need to hand over this earth to the new generation in a better way, not in have COVID-19, have bad in economy, have climate change. So something important. We have to make investment in people in STEM like science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine, and also to train people how to protect the ecosystem, protect humanity, protect our forest. It's like moral obligation, how to give back, to the new generation in a better way, how train them, about reduce, reuse, recycle, educate, volunteer, the simple things to help protect the earth. Also, we have the renewable energy, saving wildlife, adopting a smart life cycle, the 10 technology that will help a lot, to save the planet. So this, a lot of things, can invest, in people. Also, we have to, to fight, assess, fight the difference, in color, in religion, in origin, in country. We have to, to unite, also like one people, and we have to, universal adoption AI and all IoT in all the world, not only, like in Asia, in Europe, but also in Africa, and also human capital is essential, to meet the objective, for other things like climate change in all the world, in all country, because climate change will accelerate, poverty. And as I said, it's about like 32 million because of poverty in 2030, and 230 because of COVID-19. So we have, to look, for a peace, for unite all the people, for, for trade, for UNICEF, universal of the adoption of the technologies that will help a lot. And instead of, spending money in, in weapons and, in damage and the destroy, spending money, to make a new infrastructure for the new technologies that will help, a lot in climate change, in fighting climate change, and train all people about this for awareness of all people. That's the point, and in COP27, it's must be, the conference that will start to move, to start to act, not talk, because we have like 26 before the meeting, or 26 conference about climate change, and there's the a Paris agreement in 2015, so we can make the update for this agreement in in COP 27. So we update all the related points about this climate change. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk, and thanks to for all the wonderful speaker. My pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Ron, since Sharif is not here, why don't you go ahead and go next?
You'd like me to say something more? Well, I've been thinking about the human face. I have second cousins in Sweden. My grandparents came from Sweden, so I stay in touch with my relatives there. And over the last 10 years, the number of Syrian people who've moved to Sweden is substantial, 250,000 people. And separately from knowing a bit about the dynamics between the Syrian people who do not speak the language, not so many of them speak English, and just about every Swede, let's say under 70 years old, speaks English from school times quite adequately. The uh, the situation in Syria was absolutely a climate event when the drought hit the the eastern side of the country, people moved to the city to live in, to move in with relatives, as was talked about a little earlier. And then the United States and Russia decided that this was a good opportunity for a proxy war, and a whole lot of excuses were brought up about the political personalities involved in this, and precious little attention was given to the climate impact that led to the crisis in the first place. And but what fewer people know about is that in that same time, the Syrian oil fields went into decline, not because they didn't have any people to run the system, but because Mother Nature's endowment was coming to its end. And so as their expectations and demand for oil went up, the supply went down. And when those two crossed, Syria had no revenue from oil anymore. And then at that point, the oil industry of Syria collapsed completely. I mean, just all that was left was warlords, dealing with a very chaotic physical infrastructure. Many systems wouldn't work, and before you know it, most of the oil that moved around was in the black market. And so that led to the number of people departing Syria coming to about 4 million. About the same number of people were displaced inside the country from their original homes. So you had half the population of the country physically displaced, all because of climate change. But then, as a consequence, it turned you into war, exacerbated by external players who, if I had been running the show, I would have said, what you people need is water and electricity. You don't need a war to make matters worse. And some of you may know, Turkey in 2014, I don't know if they repeated this, but in 2014, they cut off all the water. Their dams were low, and the Tigris River it originates in the mountains of Turkey. So they just completely blocked it and had the extra capacity to absorb the water without sending a drop of water down to Syria, exacerbating the problem further. This was well into the crisis. So now, in a few months ago, my cousin began accommodating people who were coming from Ukraine, and in her town of 70,000 people, the number of people coming per week was 700. That's 1% per week increase in the population of a city because of the war. So, and I don't think that's by any means the largest kind of disruption. So already all around the world, we're seeing people being displaced. And if you want to see, to see the historic phenomenon, just look at Syria. Syria was the first climate change country to have lost a quarter of its population as refugees, just leaving the country right off, just like that, over a course of a very small period of time. So we're going to see that more and more, and to the extent that we treat this phenomenon as a political issue and fail to see it in its climate change perspective, it's going to be a very difficult for us to get a grip on the problem. We must understand these things in terms of climate and not immediately turn to a political interpretation, which then leads to warfare and conflict.
We lost Sharif again. Ron, let me just echo what you say as kind of my closing remarks. I think we're going to see this migration continue to pick up. Climate change particularly impacts such an increase in water stress, water levels, drop in crop productivity, raising sea levels, as well as the temperature changes, are going to really see an emergence of climate migration hotspots. And we're going to see that continue to expand. But, cutting emission, ensuring that development is green, resilient, inclusive, are going to be part of what we can do there. And as we said before, uh, a lot of this climate impact and migration impacts the countries that are least able to afford it. And that's what we're seeing in the developing nations. And, with the topic being COP27, the human face of climate change, it really is, particularly in the developing nations and particularly in the underserved nations, that is where a lot of the emphasis needs to be, and how we can put it together, and how do we pull the global audience to tackle a global problem in a way that makes the most sense to be able to solve it at truly a global level, which is where it needs to be served, is important. And I hope as COP27 continues this week and into next week, we begin to see the outcomes from the delegates at COP27 that will begin to address these issues across this broader scale and across the various systems that have to be impacted. So Hugh, I think that's my concluding remarks here, and I think you're next in the rotation.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Dave. Anyway, I think education is going to be should be a big item in this, climate change debate. My view on education is that, people say that you increase knowledge or whatever. There are many goals, but my goal is to raise the cultural level. In other words, cultural level can be raised by change the method of reason. Okay. Today we have the scientific way of reason, all by empirical verification. I'm the founder of pole science. I'm against using this method for all kinds of problems. For example, the problem of price. The price change continues to infinity. You can never say you have the right price. So in other words, this, I invent the infinite spreadsheet, which is in contrast with Milton Friedman, and we had the intellectual violent debate before he passed away. Okay, which he said he's not I have failed in brainwashing him. Okay, he's the person who can brainwash the world. Okay, but I think he's pretty much right. In contrast to Don. Don is okay. You have good intention. You want to change the world with man's method. But all Milton Friedman said was he does not want human to make laws. He trusts nature. Okay, unless you can surpass nature, then you come out to say something. I told him this infinite spreadsheet consider all the factors. Ron mentioned many factors, which are good. Just show you how varied the world is. You have to consider all the factors, then make the calculation mathematically complete. Another mathematical rigor complete. Okay, you cannot have partial rigor. You got to go to infinity, which is promoted by John von Neumann, Kenneth Arrow, Gerald de Boer. The world does not believe them, and I'm still pushing this. Okay, so you got to. I don't see anybody surpass Milton Friedman. This is what I'm saying. Okay, unless you have complete mathematical rigor, then you come out with something, and I came out with something, predict the subprime vote in 1984, predict subprime vote in June of 2006. Okay, it was just, this thing is infallible in real estate prediction, but it's not understood by the society. I'm still trying to push this, and this climate change is more difficult than financial crisis. Climate crisis is more difficult to analyze than financial crisis. And they definitely need a fuzzy infinite spreadsheet taking into consider everything. So recommend Sharif to try to approach England, and they seem to be interested in participating for various reasons. If you really look into you will find out why they are interested. Okay, it's public and private reasons. So we have opportunity, and also, this is a Conservative Party leader, so he's going to be for Milton Friedman. Okay, he's going to give us a hearing. So I hope we can all contribute to this direction. Okay, Don, you take over.
Okay, making sure I'm not muted here. I find that it's probably usually a little bit useful for governments to intervene in the markets, because I don't see that the invisible hand always works, because we wind up with extreme income disparity, which destabilizes countries. And the most stable and happiest countries have a mix where they use the wisdom of the markets, but they also have guide rails so that you don't wind up with huge income disparity. But that's a whole other discussion, and it's a lot of fun. I always enjoy discussions like that. Anyway, it's back to what I said, and I think that it goes to something that Dr. Moassa said, which is that it would be nice if we could figure out a way to be peaceful about it. Ron mentioned Syria, which was a climate war. It was a war that was started by the climate. When all the people moved to the cities, it destabilized the country to such a degree that a civil war started, and then of course Russia and the United States jumped on it and started picking sides and providing arms to one side or another, and it grew into a pretty bad situation, which still hasn't resolved itself. And that's something we're going to continue to see. But we already see it in a way that happened even before we were as aware of the climate crisis as we are now. Because when any country has a resource, a very valuable resource, and it's their main source of income, in economics they call that the resource curse. And what winds up happening is that a finite number of people wind up controlling the resource, and then everyone else in the country is poor. And so some countries that are really well known for the resource curse are like Nigeria. It's very common for countries that have the Gulf states. I mean, they have an incredibly wealthy upper class, and then the lower strata are not doing all that well necessarily. So it's Venezuela is another country where that happened to such a degree that the country just basically fell apart. And so our dependence on fossil fuels has larger repercussions than even the climate. So I think it's important that we try and understand that. And I think that what Dr. Ching said about, or Mr. Ching said, is that that education can be very helpful, because people have to learn what damage that they're doing. And it goes back to what I said about negative externalities. Besides just the pollution that it's causing, some of the negative externalities of petroleum are destabilizing countries and destabilizing the world. So the big question is, how are we? It's too late. The climate crisis is happening. I mean, there was 2 brutal hurricanes in Florida this year, and these the silly people go and they rebuild in places that are going to just get washed away, every few years. And it doesn't make any sense. After a time, they're going to have to stop doing it because insurance companies won't insure them anymore. And that's an inevitable thing. They're going to have to go somewhere. And even in the United States, people they don't necessarily welcome people with open arms. So where the Syrians, it has been a problem in Sweden. I mean, the Swedes were wonderful, and the British were wonderful because it helped them. They needed more. Their population was going down, and they needed the influx of the Syrians to help them. But one of the consequences was that racism and other kinds of xenophobia caused fascist political parties to start to rise in those countries. And that's one of the messages that basically the fascist political party in the United States was hammering on was the evils of the immigrants coming in from south of the border. And so the people migrating from one place to another it's necessary. It's something that's going to have to happen, and it's something right now that many human beings are very reluctant to have happen. And I think as part of what we're going to have to do to mitigate the climate crisis is we're going to have to understand that this is going to happen, and we're going to have to find ways to be okay with it and to integrate the immigrants. It's kind of good for the developed world because our population's going down, so it might be beneficial. So we just have to look at it in the right way. So I think that's the biggest human problem, and that's always wonderful talking to you, all you guys. You're just so interesting and exciting to talk to. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Donald, Dr. Musa, Professor Ron, Professor Ching, for joining today's sessions. This month, we have series for COP27. We do more focus on COP27. Sustainability is a big issue, climate finance, as well as different kind of problem developing nations, especially emerging economy has. And we want to invite more entrepreneurs like today's sessions who can solve developing nations problem, and that is the way we can solve problem, and we can minimize the gap, and we can develop better worlds. That is World Talent Economy Forum objective, and hopefully all of our speakers, our audience will support our projects. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Thank you, Dr. Sharif. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.